My mother looked straight at me and said, "Catherine, wait outside. This won't take long." I had just flown home after months away on deployment to bury the one person in our family who had never made me feel like I didn't belong. And now, at my grandmother's while reading, my own mother was telling me I wasn't family enough to stay. I didn't argue. I picked up my jacket and walked toward the door. My hand was already on the handle when the lawyer's voice stopped me. "No," Thomas Reed said calmly. "She stays." My mother froze. Daniel stopped moving. And suddenly, I realized they weren't trying to keep me out because the will was complicated. They were trying to keep me out because they already knew what it said. 3 days before the will reading, I was sitting in the back of a rental car, still wearing my dress uniform, watching Ohio farmland slide past the window. I had spent 8 months away on deployment, including 2 deployments back-to-back, and I kept wondering whether I would make it home in time for dinner. I had missed birthdays, holidays, and all the ordinary moments that quietly become a family's history. I had learned to live with that. What I had not learned to live with was coming home and feeling like a guest. Daniel was already sitting at the head of my parents' dining table when I arrived. He was talking about the new deck he was building, how Dad had helped with the contractor, and how the loan for the addition had finally cleared. Nobody asked about my flight. Nobody asked where I had been stationed. My mother refilled Daniel's glass before she even looked at me. When I mentioned that I would have to leave earlier than expected, because my training rotation had been moved up, she barely looked up from her plate. "You're just in the military," she said. "Don't expect this family to revolve around your schedule." I said nothing. I had learned years ago. That answering back only gave my mother another reason to call me difficult. In our family, there had always been 2 kinds of children. Daniel was the one building a future everyone understood. He stayed close to home, married young, and started a contracting business. I was the one who left. My parents treated my decision to join the military as though I had abandoned them. Meanwhile, whenever Daniel's business struggled, they were there. A down payment here, a loan there, a truck payment, insurance, whatever he needed to keep moving. I never asked them for money. My grandmother Margaret was different. She was the person who drove me to the recruiter's office when I turned 18 because my mother would not even get in the car. Margaret never treated my independence as rejection. She told me I did not need anyone's permission to become someone. Then, just after 11 that night, my phone rang. It was my aunt. Her voice was careful. "Catherine," she said, "it's your grandmother. She's gone." I do not remember what I said after that. Margaret was 89 years old. She was the one person in our family who had never made me feel like I needed to explain myself. I was on a flight back within 36 hours. When I reached her yellow house with the wraparound porch, I sat in the driveway for several minutes before I could make myself get out. That was the house where I had learned to ride a bike, shell peas, ask questions, and believe I was worth something. At the funeral, my family began quietly discussing what would happen next. Then Daniel started talking about Margaret's house. He mentioned repainting the porch. He wondered whether the zoning would allow him to add a garage. He spoke about it with the confidence of someone who had already decided the property was going to be his. 2 days later, my mother pulled me aside in the kitchen. "The will is going to be read at Margaret's lawyer's office," she said. I nodded. Then she added, "There really isn't any reason for you to sit through all of this." I looked at her. "Why not?" She avoided my eyes. "It's family business." That sentence stayed with me. I was Margaret's granddaughter. I had spent more Sundays at that kitchen table than anyone else in the family. And somehow, even after losing the person who had always made room for me, I was once again being asked to step outside. I did not argue. The next morning, I drove myself to Thomas Reed's office. I had no idea that within minutes, my mother would try to remove me from the room. And I had even less idea that Margaret had already made sure she could not. By the time I arrived at Thomas Reed's office the next morning, my mother and Daniel were already there. They were sitting in the waiting area with the strange stillness of people who had already decided how the meeting was supposed to go. Thomas stood when he saw me. Catherine, I'm glad you made it. My mother immediately got to her feet. She won't be staying. I looked at her, then at Thomas. Catherine, wait outside, she said. This won't take long. For a second, I felt that familiar tightening in my chest. The same feeling I had known since childhood. The feeling that I had somehow wandered into a room where I was not wanted. I picked up my jacket. I did not argue. I did not ask for permission to stay. I simply walked toward the door. My hand was almost on the handle when Thomas spoke. No. I turned around. She stays. The room went completely silent. My mother's expression changed first. The irritation disappeared, replaced by something I could not quite identify. Thomas looked at her calmly. You explained your situation, he said. I'm telling you the legal one. Daniel shifted in his chair. For the first time, he looked uncertain. I walked back to my seat. Thomas opened the folder in front of him. He explained that Margaret had established her estate plan years earlier, and had updated it more recently than any of us realized. Then he started reading. Daniel was to receive personal items, including Margaret's watch collection, some tools that had belonged to our grandfather, and savings bonds she had purchased for him. My parents were named for a modest amount. I listened quietly. I still assumed I was somewhere near the bottom of the list. Then Thomas turned a page. The house. I looked up. He described the yellow house with the wraparound porch. The place where I had spent summers with Margaret. The house is being left in full to Catherine. Daniel stood so quickly his chair moved backward. That can't be right. Thomas did not react. He simply turned the folder toward him. The deed was there. So was the notarized amendment. Everything was in black and white. Daniel stared at the documents as though staring long enough might change them. My mother said nothing. I barely knew what to feel. I had never asked Margaret for the house. I had never expected it. I had not even allowed myself to imagine that she had thought of me that way. But she had. And apparently, she had thought about much more than the house. Thomas reached into the folder and removed a sealed envelope. It was slightly yellowed around the edges. He turned it toward me. For Catherine, it said in Margaret's handwriting. My hands began to shake. Thomas explained that Margaret had specifically instructed him to read the letter aloud after her death, in front of the family. Then he looked at my mother. Your mother anticipated that you might object to this. My mother's face changed again. This time, there was no mistaking it. Fear. Thomas opened the envelope. The letter began with a memory of me as a little girl, standing on a kitchen chair beside Margaret, asking questions no one else wanted to answer. Then Margaret wrote about something I had almost forgotten. When I was 7 or 8, I had once asked her why Mom loved Daniel more. Margaret wrote that she had not given me the real answer then, because I was too young to carry it. Now she wanted me to know. She wrote that my mother had always been afraid of what I represented. A daughter who could build a life without being rescued. When I enlisted at 18, my mother saw abandonment. Margaret saw courage. She wrote that taking me to the recruiter's office had been one of the proudest moments of her life. I could barely breathe. Then the letter changed direction. Margaret wrote about Daniel. Years earlier, his contracting business had fallen into serious financial trouble. He had borrowed a significant amount of money from her with the expectation that he would repay it. He never did. My mother eventually convinced Margaret to write the debt off as a gift, so the family would not have to deal with an uncomfortable conversation. Margaret agreed. But she had one condition. Daniel had to tell me the truth. He never did. I looked across the room. Daniel was staring at the floor. And suddenly, the years of strange financial conversations began to make sense. Why my mother always said Daniel needed more. Why nobody ever wanted to discuss exactly where family money was going. Why I had always been made to feel selfish whenever I asked questions. Then Margaret wrote something that made the room feel smaller. There was something my mother had never told me. 3 years earlier, while I was stationed overseas, Dad had suffered a serious cardiac event. My mother had called me crying. I remembered that call. I remembered standing outside a supply tent, listening to her tell me that insurance would not cover everything. I had sent money immediately. Money I had saved for years. I believed I was helping my father. Margaret's records showed something different. At almost exactly the same time, Daniel's business was close to collapsing. Some of the money I sent home for my father's medical expenses had been redirected to keep Daniel's company afloat. My mother's explanation, preserved in Margaret's notes, was painfully simple. Daniel needs it more. Catherine has her career. I sat there staring at the page. For years, I had thought my family saw me as the daughter who had chosen a career over them. The truth was much harder. I had been sending money home because I thought I was taking care of my family, and some of that money had been used to take care of the son they believed needed more than I did. That was the moment I understood what Margaret had really been doing. She had not kept records because she wanted revenge. She had kept them because she realized that if she did not preserve the truth, nobody else would. Bank records, loan documents, transfers, emails. She had quietly built a paper trail, not to destroy my family, to make sure that one day, if I needed to know what had really happened, nobody could tell me I imagined it. Then Thomas placed the documents in front of me. I looked down at everything Margaret had saved. For the first time, the family story I had spent 20 years believing began to collapse. And the people who had always told me I was the one who did not belong suddenly had nowhere left to hide. Thomas did not need to raise his voice. He simply continued turning the pages. My mother finally interrupted him. "That's enough." Thomas looked at her. "No. Your mother instructed me to read the entire letter." That sentence changed the room. My mother had spent years deciding which conversations I was allowed to have, which family problems I needed to know about, and which truths were better kept quiet. But this time, she had no control over the conversation. Margaret had already given the instructions. Thomas was simply following them. He continued reading. Margaret explained why she had left the house to me. It was not because she loved me more than Daniel. It was because she wanted me to have something nobody could quietly redirect, borrow, reinterpret, or take away from me. A place that was fully mine. A place where nobody could stand in a doorway and tell me I did not belong. I looked toward my mother. She was standing near the window, completely still. Daniel finally found his voice. "This is insane." She was 89. You don't know what kind of state she was in. Thomas stopped reading long enough to answer him. "Your grandmother updated this estate plan 4 months before her death." He placed another document on the desk. Her physician evaluated her specifically for capacity. 2 independent witnesses were present. Neither was a family member. The signature was notarized. Daniel stared at the document. Thomas looked directly at him. "I would advise against challenging this. It will not hold." Daniel sat back. And that was the moment I watched the confidence leave his face. For years, he had lived inside a family system where someone else always solved the problem. If his business struggled, Dad helped. If he needed money, Mom found a reason. If something became uncomfortable, everyone changed the subject. But there was no changing the subject now. There was a document. There was a signature. There were witnesses. And there was Margaret's own handwriting explaining exactly why she had done it. The checkmate my mother had tried to remove me from. The room where the truth was about to be revealed. Daniel had assumed the house would become his. They both believed Catherine could be pushed aside, because that was how the family had always worked. But Margaret had changed the rules before either of them realized there was a game. The house was mine. The estate plan was valid. And the records showed that the family had hidden financial decisions from me for years. Nobody had to threaten anyone. Nobody had to destroy anything. The documents did it themselves. Thomas handed me copies of the records Margaret had preserved. I looked at the stack in front of me. Bank statements, loan documents, transfers, emails. Years of evidence that told the same story. My mother had spent years telling me that Daniel needed more. Margaret had quietly documented exactly what that decision had cost me. Daniel looked at the papers but did not reach for them. My mother said nothing. And I realized something almost painfully simple. They had spent years treating me like the person who needed permission to belong. Now I was sitting in the one room where their permission no longer mattered. I had not fought them. I had not manipulated the will. I had not broken a single rule. I had simply stayed in the room long enough for the truth to speak for itself. And when Thomas closed the folder, there was nothing left for them to argue with. Checkmate. The meeting ended without another argument. Thomas gave me copies of everything and reminded me that I could contact him if I had questions. He also made it clear that the transfer of the house would proceed regardless of what my family decided to do privately. I walked out of that office carrying documents that changed how I understood almost my entire life. 2 days later, Daniel called. He did not ask how I was doing. He did not apologize. He went straight to the house. "You're my sister," he said. "You don't need it. I have a family. I have kids who will want that place someday." I asked him one question. "Did you ever ask Grandma if she wanted you to have it?" He went silent. That silence told me everything. The next day, my mother called. Her approach was different. She talked about everything they had sacrificed for us. The years of raising 2 children. The sleepless nights. The things she believed I owed them. "After everything we've done for you," she said. I was standing in Margaret's kitchen, looking at the chair where she used to sit every morning with her coffee. For 20 years, I had swallowed the same feeling. That I owed my family something simply because I was their daughter. This time, I finally said it. "That's exactly the problem, Mom. You always made me feel like I owed you for being your daughter." I didn't yell. I didn't insult her. I didn't try to make her feel the pain I had carried. I simply told her the truth. Over the next few weeks, I went through everything Thomas had given me. The records were more extensive than I expected. Bank statements, loan documents, transfers, emails. Years of information Margaret had preserved because she knew that someday I might need proof of what had really happened. I discovered that Daniel's business had been supported more than once by money from our parents, and by funds I had sent home believing they were being used elsewhere. The hardest part wasn't discovering the money. It was seeing the pattern. For years, my family had called me selfish because I had left. They said I chose the military over them. They said Daniel needed more. But when I was given the chance to help my family, I had done it. I had sent money when Dad was sick. I had sacrificed savings. I had tried to be the daughter they claimed I wasn't. And some of that devotion had quietly been redirected toward the person they had always chosen first. Daniel eventually called again and demanded that I sign the house over. This time, my answer was simple. "I'm not going to destroy my family over money." Then I added the part that mattered. "But I'm done protecting people who never protected me." I kept the house. Not because I wanted Daniel to suffer. Not because I wanted to punish my mother. I kept it because Margaret had deliberately given me something nobody else could quietly take away. She had given me a place where I belonged. Spring came slowly to Ohio. I spent most of my leave repairing the house myself. I fixed the leaking faucet. I patched the porch railing. I kept the yellow kitchen tile. I kept the curtains Margaret had sewn decades earlier. And I kept her chair by the window. Sometimes I would sit there with my coffee and remember the woman who had always seen me clearly. Daniel's business eventually failed without the financial cushion he had relied on for so long. I heard about it from an aunt. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel responsible for saving him either. For the first time. His problems were simply his problems. My mother started calling more often. At first, there was still blame in her voice. Eventually, something changed. The blame became quieter. Her words sometimes sounded almost like an apology, although she never quite said the word. I listened. I answered honestly. But I didn't rush back into the old version of our relationship. I had learned that forgiveness did not mean pretending nothing happened. Trust had to be rebuilt. Slowly. On a Sunday in early June, I drove to Margaret's grave. I brought flowers from her own garden. I sat beside her headstone and took the letter from my jacket. I had read it so many times that I almost knew the final lines by heart. Margaret had written that I never needed to become the child my family chose. I only needed to become someone I could be proud of on my own terms, without anyone's permission. I looked back toward the yellow house. The porch was catching the afternoon light. The swing moved gently in the breeze. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the daughter standing outside a door that would not open. I felt like a woman standing in front of a home that was unquestionably hers. That was Margaret's real gift. Not the house. Not the money. The certainty that I had never needed my family's permission to belong. And sometimes, the quietest form of justice is simply refusing to step back into the role they created for you. If you've ever been treated like the less important child in your own family, remember this. Being overlooked does not mean you are worthless. And being chosen last does not mean you have to spend your life waiting to be chosen. Sometimes the best answer is to build a life where nobody gets to decide whether you belong. And if you think this was the last time Catherine had to face a family member who believed they could control what was hers, the next story gets even more uncomfortable.